In the chilling autumn of 1944, World War II was reaching its zenith. The Vosges Mountains, a region between France and Germany, untouched by war since the Roman Empire's conquests, became the backdrop for a desperate struggle. Its dense forests concealed the movements of armies, making it a treacherous theatre of war where a deadly test of survival would unfold. It was into this challenging terrain that the Texas Battalion of the American 141st Infantry, consisting of 275 soldiers, was dispatched. Under the command of the ambitious and impatient Major General John E. Dahlquist, they were driven by the objective to secure the region for the Allied push into the German homeland. But unbeknownst to them, an estimated 6,000 Nazi troops lay in wait, ready to ensnare the Americans. Suddenly, the battalion found themselves encircled. The Nazis, with the high ground, had them cornered. Every escape route, mined and protected by machine gun nests, was a trap. Every call for help echoed unanswered. A 36-man patrol from the Texans attempted a daring breakout, but only 5 returned, painting a grim picture of the situation. Desperate for reinforcements, only one hope remained for the Texans: the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Composed mainly of Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, they were soldiers with something to prove. Facing contempt back home after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, they were determined to showcase their patriotism on the battlefield. The 3,000 men were the last remaining chance for the ensnared Texans. The Nisei soldiers, facing 2-to-1 odds, plunged headfirst into the fray, engaging in a brutal firefight. As the situation grew increasingly dire, the Nisei Battalion Command received an order to fix bayonets. This was a last-ditch effort, a signal for close-quarters combat. The battle was on to save the Lost Battalion, and the 442nd was going for broke. The nightmare for Japanese Americans began with the devastating attack of Imperial Japan on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. President Roosevelt immediately declared war on Japan, and the idea of a Japanese fifth column within the United States spread like wildfire. A paranoia-fueled wave of fear and animosity swept the country, targeting them as enemy aliens. The government took swift action, confining hundreds of thousands in internment camps nationwide, uprooting families, and robbing them of their properties and freedoms. In 1942, Rudy Tokiwa, a teenage son of a humble farming family in Coyote, California, got his first taste of this unforgiving reality. Men claiming to be FBI agents stormed their peaceful home, accusing Tokiwa's father of espionage. Desperate to protest their innocence, they presented his World War I uniform, a tangible testament to his loyalty and service to America. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. The lead agent cast the uniform aside, crushing it under his boot, declaring, quote, "No Japs fought with us in World War I." Stripped of their rights, the Tokiwas were forced to leave their farm and home and herded into American concentration camps. They ended up at Poston, Arizona in one of the sub-camps, where Rudy worked in the block mess hall while participating in sports, all within the confines of their prison-like surroundings. Yet, amid the harsh desert nights and under the watchful eyes of armed guards, the spirit of these Japanese Americans remained unbroken. As Rudy endured his days in captivity, global events beyond his control brought him closer to his destiny. The Japanese Empire had embarked on a powerful propaganda campaign, painting the Americans as hateful racists. They exploited the plight of the interned Japanese Americans to convince the Pacific Island populations that a victorious America would subjugate them to similar conditions. American authorities proposed a bold plan to counteract this propaganda. Form a combat team composed solely of Japanese American volunteers. The main goal was to showcase how these unfairly treated citizens willingly defended their country against autocracy and despotism. President Roosevelt approved the plan, and recruitment commenced. In February 1943, Army recruiters visited internment camps, administering a loyalty questionnaire and seeking volunteers for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Rudy and other young men from their block enlisted as a group. These were not isolated acts of bravery. Over 1,200 interned Japanese American youth opted to fight for the country that had wrongly imprisoned them. But their choice was often frowned upon by their communities, because as impressive as the number of recruits was, the truth was that most of the young second-generation Japanese Americans were resentful and felt deeply betrayed. refusing to join the armed forces and even sabotaging the loyalty questionnaire efforts inside the concentration camps. The older generation also struggled to comprehend this decision, unable to fathom why they would risk their lives for a country that had stripped them of their rights. The decision was clear for the young men forming the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. As Tokiwa would later express, quote, "The only way we were going to prove we were Americans was go to the front lines and prove in the front lines that we were Americans." So they journeyed from internment camps to boot camps and then into the unforgiving maw of World War II. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, including the 100th Battalion, entered their first significant engagement together on June 26, 1944, in the village of Belvedere in Suvereto, Tuscany. The path ahead of them was long and filled with grueling battles, but the members of 442nd's very identity as American citizens was at play, and they would do anything to prove they were American. The Belvedere battle was a tactical masterpiece that showcased the bravery, strategic acumen, and tenacity of these Japanese-American soldiers. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions were the first to engage in combat in a fierce firefight with the enemy. F Company was at the center of the harshest fighting. Meanwhile, A, B, and C companies from the 100th were mobilized and advanced eastward, taking a concealed route to reach high ground northeast of Belvedere. In the chaos of warfare, efficient and effective communication was paramount to the success of a military operation. Radios served as critical lifelines, allowing for the coordination of troops and the delivery of strategic instructions, but sometimes radios failed. That was where local runners came into the picture. Rudy Tokiwa was one of them. He displayed an extraordinary level of courage and dedication to his duty. As a runner, he would carry messages, orders, and strategic updates from the command center directly to soldiers at the front lines, often navigating treacherous and contested territory under enemy fire. With the help of outstanding runners such as Tokiwa and the unrelenting efforts of the fighters on the front lines, the operation continued successfully. C Company blocked the entrance to the town, while A Company blocked the exit. Simultaneously, the 442nd 2nd Battalion was under a heavy barrage from the Germans inside Belvedere, yet the Germans were oblivious to the fact that they were being led to a deadly trap. B Company took up a position on high ground and launched a surprise attack on the German battalion's exposed east flank. This forced the Germans into a desperate retreat, running directly into C Company, which drove them towards A Company in a deadly ping-pong trap that decimated the German troops. The Presidential Unit Citation Review's report of the operation encapsulated the valor and spirit of the 100th Infantry Battalion, reading, quote, "All 3 companies went into action boldly facing murderous fire from all types of weapons and tanks, and at times fighting without artillery support. The stubborn desire of the men to close with a numerically superior enemy and the rapidity with which they fought enabled the 100th Infantry Battalion to destroy the right flank positions of a German army completely. The fortitude and intrepidity displayed by the officers and men of the 100th Infantry Battalion reflects the finest traditions of the Army of the United States." The quote captures the fearless determination of these Nisei soldiers. Despite facing a numerically superior enemy and at times fighting without artillery support, they employed their strategic skills and unwavering resolve to triumph. This bold operation set the stage for the unit's reputation for courage and effectiveness, reflecting the highest traditions of the United States Army. After their victory in Belvedere, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, including the 100th Infantry Battalion, continued to push northward, engaging enemy forces in numerous skirmishes until they passed Sasetta. The Battle of Belvedere had demonstrated that the 442nd was more than capable of holding their own against enemy forces. It also gave them a glimpse into the intense combat the 100th Battalion had endured in the preceding months. After a brief rest period, the United 442nd was thrust back into combat on July 1st. They successfully took Cesena and then proceeded toward the Arno River. On July 2nd, as the 442nd was advancing towards the Arno, the 5th Battalion was engaged in a fierce battle to seize Hill 140. This hill was a strategic position that provided a commanding view of the surrounding area, making it a vital objective. On July 7th, the 100th Battalion was tasked with capturing the town of Castellina Marittima. This town was another strategic objective due to its position on the road network and the potential for using it as a staging area for further operations. Throughout this campaign, the 442nd and the 100th demonstrated the same courage, determination, and skill that had marked their engagement in Belvedere. Despite their challenges, they continued to push forward, undeterred by the formidable resistance they encountered. Each victory further proved the mettle of these Japanese-American soldiers and solidified their reputation as one of the most effective units in the US Army. By the time they went into France, the looks of scorn from other American soldiers had changed into looks of admiration and respect. The campaign through the Vosges Mountains in October 1944 proved challenging for the 442nd and the 100th Infantry Battalion. The terrain differed from what they had experienced in Italy, with dense fog, muddy conditions, heavy rain, large trees and hilly landscapes. Added to this was the relentless enemy gunfire and artillery, which only increased after Hitler ordered the German front line to fight at all costs. The battle to secure the hills around Bruyères was intense and chaotic. Each mountain was heavily guarded, as they were vital in securing the city. The men of the 442nd struggled to advance amid a storm of machine gun fire and snipers picking out any American soldier daring to stand still for more than a second. Still, when they attempted to take cover, they were met with thunderous artillery barrages, leaving them in a constant state of vulnerability and terror. Despite the overwhelming odds, the 100th Battalion and 2nd Battalion managed to take Hill A and B, respectively. However, the victory was incomplete until Hills C and D were secured, as the Germans used the high ground to launch artillery barrages on the town. The 442nd initially took Hills C and D after a grueling fighting climb, but as soon as they took control of the coveted position, a German counterattack sent them back into the valley below. Retaking them cost mounting casualties, but the young Japanese Americans were laser-focused on their objective. With the assistance of the 232nd Engineers, who had the challenging task of dismantling roadblocks, clearing away trees, and defusing minefields amidst the battle, the 442nd succeeded in securing both hills. It again cemented their reputation as one of the most effective units in the European theatre. After their heroic exploits in Bruyères, the 100th found itself pinned down in the battle for Bifontaine without a moment's rest. After being encircled by German forces and cut off from the 442nd outside radio contact. Outside artillery support, the 100th resorted to brutal house-to-house fighting and defended against multiple counterattacks as they navigated the urban landscape and fought in hand-to-hand combat. But they would not be left to fend for themselves. Soon, the 3rd Battalion of the 442nd breached through the outer German blockade and reached the 100th. Together, they drove out the remaining German forces and secured Bifontaine. After months of relentless fighting and a grueling journey through war-torn Italy and France, the 442nd and 100th Infantry Battalion were given a brief rest period, but the promised rest would never become a reality, as soon the Japanese-American regimental force was again needed to rescue a lost battalion in the Vosges forest. John E. Dahlquist's unbecoming attitude and strategic missteps came to a head when he commanded the 36th Infantry Division, a Texas National Guard unit, to penetrate deep into German lines, disregarding their lack of knowledge about the terrain and the absence of backup support. The 36th had already faced an arduous war. It was stationed on the German border in the Vosges Mountains in southeastern France. From surviving the onslaught of German panzers at the Salerno landings to suffering heavy losses while crossing the Rapido River in January 1944 in Italy, it had been tried and tested. By late 1944, the men were braving the cold, battling through the forested mountains blocking the path into Germany. Dahlquist's ill-conceived command sent the 36th Division's 141st Regiment 4 miles deep into German territory, ignoring the threat of a German counterattack. Dahlquist was confident that the Germans lacked the strength to resist effectively, envisioning a victorious advance deeper into their territory. He was wrong. The Germans had the numbers and counterattacked, trapping the 141st's 1st Battalion, who were desperately trying to retreat. The 250 trapped American soldiers scrambled up a 150-meter-high, densely forested hill that lay ominously close to the forest's edge. They hastily set up a defensive position at its peak, digging into the soil to withstand the relentless German attacks. Even at noon, little light pierced the tree canopy, leaving their makeshift fortress in darkness. The gloom, though aiding their defense, wore on their nerves as the German assault intensified. Within days, their food and ammunition dwindled, and the enemy force grew larger and more unyielding. If help didn't arrive soon, they would be obliterated on that dreadful slope. One account described their situation, quote, "The Lost Battalion situation was desperate. Isolated for 6 days, the Texans had beaten back 5 enemy assaults. Casualties mounted, yet they couldn't evacuate the bodies. They pooled their meager supplies of food and ammo and risked German sniper fire to get water. The Allies tried to send supplies. First, they shot shells filled with chocolate, but the shelling caused casualties. A few days later, the Allies dropped supplies by parachute, but most of the packages landed in German-occupied positions." Dahlquist faced a grim reality. If he did not rescue the Lost Battalion, his decisions would cost the lives of 250 Americans. In his desperation, he ordered the 141st Infantry's other 2 battalions to attempt to rescue the Lost Battalion on 2 separate occasions. However, they were met with overwhelming German resistance. A wall of enemy defenses positioned high on hilltops presented a seemingly insurmountable challenge. With mounting casualties and no progress, Dahlquist found himself out of options. His only available resource was the unit he derogatorily referred to as the Jap Regiment. So, despite promises of rest, Tokiwa and the men of the 442nd were roused in the middle of the night. New orders had come in. They were moving again. On October 25, 1944, the 442nd Regiment, already wearied from liberating the towns of Treacherous and Bifontaine in France, received a new mission: rescue the Lost Battalion, ensnared 10 miles away in the dense forest of the Vosges Mountains. While some in the regiment felt they might have been chosen due to being seen as expendable, others held on to the belief that their proven combat prowess had earned them this task. Undeterred by these thoughts, they pressed on. Navigating the tree's oppressive darkness on October 27th, they formed a human chain for guidance, each soldier's hand resting on the shoulder of the one in front. The thick canopy above negated any hope of armored or aerial support. They were on their own in this endeavor to save the Lost Battalion. As dawn broke and they neared their objective, the Germans unleashed a barrage of sniper bullets and artillery shells from 88mm and 105mm guns. Suddenly, the 442nd found themselves trapped in a ravine, with the enemy dominating the high ground of Hill 617. The battle turned into a tense standoff. General Dahlquist's growing impatience manifested in sending Rudy Tokiwa to the front lines with increasingly urgent orders. The Germans, heavily fortified on the surrounding hills, weren't about to let up, launching devastating counterattacks from their static positions. In a high-risk strategic pivot, the 442nd on October 29th split their forces. While one group mounted a diversion with an uphill charge, the others attempted a flanking maneuver. Amidst this chaos, Private Barney Hajiro stood out, dismantling 2 enemy machine gun nests and neutralizing 2 snipers. His valor would later earn him the Medal of Honor, yet the Germans remained entrenched. In a moment of heightened tension, Dahlquist personally confronted the 442nd on the front lines, insinuating they weren't giving their all. But hope wasn't lost. In spite of Dahlquist, the Nisei rallied to deploy a combination of diversionary banzai charges and flanking maneuvers. The 442nd managed to seize Hill 617 and regrouped at the base to prepare for one last push to free their trapped comrades. A final coordinated charge with pistols and bayonets shattered the German defenses. On October 30th, after 6 relentless days of combat, the 442nd broke through to the Lost Battalion. The 442nd had achieved the impossible, and they immediately became heroes across America and sources of inspiration for all Allied fighters. The US had stained its hands with the disgrace of the Japanese internment camps. The 442nd offered an opportunity to reframe their image and tell a story of tolerance and justice instead. Their exploits were a rallying cry and a salve for America's conscience, a chance at redemption for an infamous decision. But the price had been steep. Japanese Americans of the 442nd rescued 211 survivors of the Lost Battalion at the cost of over 800 Nisei casualties. The impact the six-day battle had on the members of the regimental force would tower over all the other conflicts the unit had already participated in. It would leave deep scars in their minds for the rest of their lives. Still, the 442's bravery was significantly rewarded, becoming the most decorated unit in US military history for its size and length of service, with its component 100th Infantry Battalion earning the nickname the Purple Heart Battalion due to the number injured in combat. In 1962, Texas Governor John Connally named the veterans of the 442nd Honorary Texans for their heroic rescue of the Lost Battalion. 3 members, Barney Hajiro, James Okubo, and George Sakato, initially received lesser military medals due to the discrimination of that era. Their valor, however, couldn't be ignored, and their honors were upgraded to the Medal of Honor in 2000. Regarding Dahlquist, his mistreatment of the unit did not stop even after succeeding in their mission, according to one account. Quote, "When Division Commander Dahlquist ordered the 442nd to assemble for a recognition ceremony, he scolded a 442nd colonel, 'You disobeyed my orders. I told you to have the whole regiment.' The colonel looked him in the eye and reportedly said, 'General, this is the regiment.' Dahlquist was furious that the 442nd had suffered so many casualties, as it did not reflect well on his image as a military leader. The American military top brass realized the tragic situation of the Texas Battalion, and the high Nisei casualties were primarily due to Dahlquist's poor leadership. Many believed that his deficient leadership led to the 442nd becoming the most highly decorated unit in the history of the United States. His performance was so concerning that Major General Lucien Truscott, commander of the 6th Corps, under which unit the 36th Division was serving, considered stripping him of his command. Nevertheless, he would continue in charge of the 36th Division until the war's end. Despite the harrowing experiences, the Nisei stood tall. They paid the ultimate price and proved their unwavering loyalty and American spirit. Their legacy, adorned with purple hearts, silver stars, and marked by their cry of "Go for broke," stood as a testament to American loyalty, honor, and resilience. President Harry Truman told them when they returned from Europe, quote, "You have fought not only the enemy, but you have fought prejudice, and you have won." And that they did.